cartoon that Patton tried to get Bill Walden court-martialed for doing. Anyway, it's all out there on the table, guys, so take a look at it when you get a chance.
Thanks, Bill. And once more, as I usually like to do, thanks to all the veterans that are here. It's always amazing that regardless of where you served, when you served, there's a little bond between all veterans, but especially those of you who are about to hold up your hands, your World War II veterans, please. Fabulous. That's about as big a turnout of World War II veterans as we've seen in quite a while, and I suspect it has something to do with our speaker this evening, one of their own, and we're looking forward to your comments. So, Frank, if you'd like to stand up and tell us a little bit about the 45th Inventory. I'm sorry. Hold on. Laura has something here. Just a second.
Real quick.
While you're getting. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. If anybody wants these hearing assistant gizmos, we've got a handful of them. If anybody needs them.
These work great. We have 4 in the audience already, and there are 4 left. Cliff's got 1. So these work great. There's a volume setting. It will block out the background noise.
Absolutely.
It will help with the enunciation. Please let us know. Cliff's got a couple in the back. And also here tonight is
Speaker's entitled to a throne.
Also here tonight, except I've lost him in the crowd, Rodney, where are you? Rodney is visiting us from the Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle. He's brought some things along, and if you haven't had a chance to get over to AHEC, the museum over there, the bookstore, it's an awesome, awesome experience. There's a special exhibit now going on that's called A Soldier's Story, and there will be more information out there. They also do programs once a month. Fantastic, great program. So you can see Rodney later. That's it. Sorry.
Don't be sorry, that's very good. Thank you for coming. So, if there's anybody else who's got anything to say, that'd be a good time to say it. Otherwise, I'm going to let Frank Stevenson say everything he knows about the 45th Infantry Division. You're on.
Okay. Speaking of Bill Walden, it was with our outfit. And one of our favorite things was, at Anzio, we were down in the flat part, and unfortunately we didn't have enough troops to take the mountains. And there was a town up there called Velletri, and we finally took it. And we looked down, they could see if we lit a cigarette down there. And that's why they said, cut out the glimmer, you couldn't have any cigarettes during the nighttime. But his cartoon was, here, there we was, and here they was. They could see everything down there at the base of the mountain. Now, for myself, in 1942, I was a junior at Penn State. And they came around, the recruiter, and said, if they could go to the Navy, the Army, the Marines. And I had 2 years of ROTC, so I happened to go to the Army. And they said, we found out that most college graduates, officers were college graduates. So if you will sign up with the Army, we will let you, since you're accelerating, we'll let you graduate, and then you'll go to OCS or ASTP. Now, most people don't know what ASTP was, but some do. Army Specialized Training Program. They said they fouled up after World War I, and they wanted to have guys ready for Army of Occupation. Well, that sounded fine to me. I just assumed do that as anything. But shortly after that, instead of allowing us to graduate, they said on May the 26th of 43, report to Fort Meade, Maryland. And then we went from Fort Meade, Maryland to Cape Wheeler, Georgia for basic. We said, now when do we go to OCS or ASTP? They said, you go to Fort Meade, Maryland for delay en route 1 week for assignment overseas. So we went over to Casablanca, and from there we took boxcars over to Iran, and we were in Iran Christmas Day, and then they took us over to Naples, and I was put in a replacement depot. When you're in the replacement, I never thought of at the time, what that means is somebody else has been killed or wounded, or captured, and you're going to take his place. So I was assigned to the 157th to the 45th, and we were a place called Piedemonte, which was not too far from Casino. And when I joined the outfit, I was called down to the headquarters because they were in a rest area, and I had no idea what was going on. And they said, the line companies have enough to do going on patrols several nights a week. We're going to form one platoon. We're going to form called the Ranger Platoon, nothing to do with the Ranger outfit. And they will do all the patrolling. So if C Company wants a patrol, they'll say, we want a patrol to go out and take care of that for us. Well, now I have heard a couple of things. And the one thing is the Army never volunteered. And the second is, the worst thing you could be in the Army is an infantry lineman. That morning, I was an infantry lineman. And it didn't work out that way because those guys were getting killed or wounded by the dime a dozen. And I volunteered to be with this Ranger platoon. And first few patrols we had were just nothing, just to get used to it. But then after a while, they'd send 3 or 6 or 12 of us out on patrols. And for a while I said, the reason you guys have us on patrols is if the Germans attack, we'll be the first ones to be able to tell you about it. But it turned out, I never realized this until the war was over for many years. But it wasn't as dangerous as I thought. We got on these patrols, and we could hear the Germans talking, they could hear us talking. If I shoot at them, what are they going to do to me? And as a result, I could have spent the rest of the war there and not have any trouble. Now, as far as that's concerned, one of your fellows here, Bill Kuhn, was on outfit, and that son of a gun, he was only in combat for about 2 weeks. And he got hit in the leg. He's got a Purple Heart. I had over 300 days of combat, and I still don't have my Purple Heart. My wife threatens to give me one of these. But when they went out on patrols, my foxhole buddy, incidentally, he said when you dig a foxhole, dig it for 2, so that one can wake the other. And I keep wishing, nowadays they have co-ed armies, and if I could have a foxhole with a beautiful blonde, I wouldn't give a damn if the war was going on. But at my age, if I saw the most beautiful girl and she tried to attack me, I'd be like the dog who chased after the car. What would I do with it? But on the whole, I was quite fortunate with the patrols. But and then right after we joined it, they said they were going to go to Anzio, and we had never heard of it. The 3rd Division went there on January 22nd, and we landed there on January 29th. And we got into it a bit, and there was no war going on at all, so we didn't fear anything. But soon we were on a 2.5-ton truck, so we were just overloaded. And a couple of planes come over. One of our guys who was experienced, he says, those Spitfires. Well, it turned out they weren't Spitfires, they were German Messerschmitts, and they dropped some bombs. And fortunately for me, they landed maybe 10, 15 feet from me, and I didn't get hurt. But there were a couple of guys who were killed in that first bombing raid. Then the next thing we did, a couple of days later, my buddy and I were out of our foxhole, and we saw these German planes dropping leaflets. And it turned out they weren't German planes. There was a dogfight going up there, and instead of a pamphlet, it was the gas tank from one of the planes, which came down and banged into the record. Once again, we didn't get hit. But they did have, at that time, the German had a remote bomb thing. And one night we were laying there, and one of these remote things went and hit one of our ships. And that ship was an ammo ship, and it just flew up in the air and back down into the water. But then it became a stalemate, and then Hitler gave the order to wipe that abscess off the face of the earth. So, along about February, the counterattack started, and they hit our battalion with 18 German battalions. And it did seem like a fair battle, but you have to realize something. There were 2 destroyers sitting off coast, and they fired their 5-inch guns, just like overhead, and just kept pulverizing what they could. Now, the next morning, the 8th Air Force was up in England, but the 15th was down at Foggia, Italy, and they had over 1,000 bombers, dive bombers, and other bombers, plus escorts, and they sent over those 40,000 guys, and when they started dropping their bombs, my buddy said, "You better count your children, Hitler." And when it was all over in the Pacific, the guys could drop bombs all they wanted to or shell Iwo Jima, those places with those coral reefs and stuff, and they were safe. But here with just dirt and a foxhole, it was tough. So I don't know how many Germans were killed or wounded, but they took a 2-hour truce to allow them to pick up all their stuff and go on from there. Now, my first shelling, they told us, if you get into a barrage, be sure to open your mouth so that the concussion doesn't break your eardrums. And when that first barrage came in, they started hitting about 5, 8, 10 feet from me. My mouth was so far open, I could swallow half the ocean, I think. But fortunately, we survived that. But a few days later, we went on a patrol to what they call the caves in Italy. And 2 days later, the Germans had a raid, and they captured every one of the guys of our 2nd Battalion that were in the caves. The medical guy with them, he stayed with them. And 1 or 2 fellows did get out, but they had to re-arm the entire 2nd Battalion. From then on, it was quite a stalemate. And one of the patrols we went up to B Company, CP, and they were in what's called Garibaldi's tomb. And I found out Garibaldi was some hero, but it was Garibaldi's son where they had this tomb. And we'd go there to report before we went on the patrols. And the body was buried downstairs, and these guys, they could shell it all they wanted to, and they weren't hurt. So, once again, the stalemate continued, and one night, a German plane came over and dropped a string of about 8 or 9 bombs, and about 4 of them hit the back of me, and 4 of them hit in front of me, and never one of them hit me. I did, during the course of the war, I happened to take 2 German prisoners, but nothing sacred about that. The other thing that did happen, I may jump back and forth, but after we made the landing in southern France, we got inland maybe 40, 50 miles, and since I spoke pretty much German, every time we get prisoners, I would speak with them, so I got to know the language better. My goal was to learn 1 or 2 new words every day, so we got prisoners, I'd talk to them. And this time, our guys took 6 German prisoners, and they told me to take them to the rear. Well, the rear was about 5 miles back, so halfway back, they said, "Can we take a break?" So they sat on one side of the ravine, and I sat the other side, and they asked for a drink of water, and I did a stupid thing, but it was all right. Instead of throwing in the canteen, I threw in my cartridge belt, which had a canteen in it and 3 hand grenades. I thought if they wanted to, they could pull a pin and say goodbye to me. But the one guy said to me, we were told how we'd be tortured and never ever give up because the torture would be impossible to understand. He said the guy that took us, the people that took us were gentlemen, and you're acting like a gentleman. And I'd like to acknowledge that in some way. And he had a little black medal that he had won in a bicycle race in Berlin. Not the Olympics, but just something that meant something to them. And I have that little thing in my case here right now. To me, I like that as much as I do my bronze stars and so forth. But then, again, when we went to patrols, they taught us in basic training, if a flare goes up, act like a tree. Don't fall down or they'll see it. And my buddy said they knew damn well there was no tree there all day long, and if the flare goes up, I'm going to hit the ground. And he did. And I always say he ended up keeping me sane, because we had our foxhole, and we lay there, and he'd put his foot up and he'd say, hit that damn thing, hit that damn thing. He wanted a Purple Heart to get out of there. It turned out that he did get $1 million wound, because he had been in pre-veterinary at Penn State. He had finished his freshman year, and he wanted to join the Navy. And the recruiter said, the only thing in the Navy are horses, are seahorses. You want to be in the Army where you actually see horses. Well, he never saw a horse. But after he landed in southern France, we had taken a little town. He was standing by a drinking fountain there, and a shell came in and hit a few of them, and it hit him, took off one toe and took out his eye. And he was funny, he'd be talking to you, all of a sudden he'd pull his eye out and say, you want to handle this thing. And he had what he called his unocular. He did not need a binocular, he only had the one eye. But he said the reason it was $1 million wound was, he was a C student. And when he got hit then, he got home to the States, to Penn State, became a C student, and he applied for vet school. There were 4 other applicants for vet school. At the end of the war, there had been maybe 400 applying. And he said this C student got to be a veterinarian, and he became a successful small animal veterinarian in Maple Shade, New Jersey. So that was a real story of $1 million wound. Now then, as the war went on, we ended up helping to take Rome on June the 4th. And then we went back to rest area, and we always thought we were going to go to the Balkans because Churchill kept talking about the soft underbelly. But it turned out we made the landing in southern France on August 15th. We had between Saint-Tropez and Saint Michel. And I always tell my wife, I ran across the Riviera, and there were no gowns there with bras or anything else at the time. But when the war was over, my wife and I, we retraced our steps, and we started by going to Nice, France, and when we got there, we found out that they did have and none of you guys are appreciative of this, but a braless beach, because none of we fellows check on Hooters like that, but once in a while you take a quick look. But we were there for about 3 or 4 days. That's when we were redoing our treks. But during the war, after we took that part of France, we moved up to a place called Remberville, and by that time I was with an OP gun, which meant that we would get in high spots and look for targets for the artillery. And we got to this town of Remberville, and we got to the church, and we were doing some observing, and all of a sudden the Germans knew we were there, but we were safe because we were down a little bit, and the walls were this thick, and the shells were just bouncing off. But the shells were lancing around the center area, and the French people were so thrilled with being liberated, they were out joyously celebrating the thing in the center square, and many of those shells landed in the center square. 42 of them were killed in a hurry, and they brought the bodies into the church, and his relatives would come by, they look at this one, look at that one, and when they saw one of theirs, they'd scream. Then, after we took that, we moved in what's called the Vosges Mountains in eastern France. I've never heard of it, Vosges. Now, when you're in a regular situation, when a shell lands and you got a guy, whoever experienced it, the shrapnel goes up and out. So if you're in a foxhole just 3 feet away, you won't get hurt. But unless you can put a roof over your foxhole, and that was rare, it wasn't any good. But when you get into the woods, you have what they call tree bursts. Now the shell hits the tree, and all the shrapnel comes down and out. And a lot of the kids were getting hit, not necessarily killed, but they were pretty much out of commission. And it was November, we were getting cold, and a lot of guys were getting trench feet. And when we went up online, our battalion had 1,000 guys, and when we came back, there were 95 of us left, which, again, not all were killed, but a lot of casualties. And once again, I was fortunate. So we then were able to move over. We got into Alsace-Lorraine, and we then pushed off into Germany. And we got to a town called Aschaffenburg, and they said, Patton has cleared it. Well, he cleared it in this way. His son-in-law had been captured in Africa, and he was in a prison camp right close by. So he took about 40 tanks and 40 trucks and so forth. And they broke the prison camp down. He got his son-in-law, but they didn't have enough vehicles to take all of them. So our C Company commander, who was in there, he was one that couldn't get anything, so he was recaptured. And he was scared to death because if you are recaptured, but they treated him civilly for the rest of the war, and I got to see him later on. We had the odd part there was, we took Aschaffenburg on Easter Sunday that day, and my brother was landing in Okinawa that same day, and he was okay, except he got some shrapnel in his back, but he didn't report to the medics, it wasn't that bad. While in Anzio, the Germans, where they had a Red Cross on the tents for the hospital, the Germans used that as an aiming area. And a lot of guys would get wounds that weren't too bad, and they refused. They were better off in their foxhole than going back to the hospital. That was really a shame. So we moved over into Bamberg, and things were moving pretty fast now. We were just surrendering pretty fast. And Bamberg was the day that Roosevelt died. And then we went and helped take Nuremberg with a couple of other outfits. And when we were trying to get through the Siegfried line, there was a pillbox there that everybody pinned down. And there was a Corporal Wilkins from our C Company who was able to crawl around the back of the pillbox. He took a couple of home grenades and threw them into the pillbox, and that stopped the machine gun fire. And we were able to get up and walk right on through. Unfortunately, we got to Nuremberg, and a sniper killed Wilkins. He got the most honor, but he did live to see it. Now, another fellow who did was a fellow who was Sergeant Barfoot, one of the Indians from way back, and he did get the Medal of Honor for all the work that he had done. Now, when he got home, he was living in some community, and he put the American flag out. This was on national television, and the people said, our rules are we can't have the American flag. And he said, I got the purple, I got the most famous Medal of Honor, and I can't have a flag, that flag's gonna stay. And the people got an uproar, and he had his flag up until this day. So, well, after we finished taking Nuremberg, I now was with the S2, where supposed to be intelligence, but my main job was preparing maps for the next day's advance. And this day I got a map, and they said, we're going to come to some kind of a concentration camp tomorrow, and just be aware of that. Well, all of us said, we knew it was a propaganda during First World War, where they showed a picture of a German carrying a baby on a sword or something like that, and it was just propaganda, so we thought maybe it's propaganda. Well, we got close to this town of Dachau, and all of a sudden, the company commander said, you better go over and see that place. So a group of us went over to big signs, our way on Fry. And we went in, I met an Austrian there who was, he said, since he was not really a threat, he was allowed to see things and do things that others couldn't. So he took me around the camp, and first of all, he showed me the ovens, and then there's a picture in my book of the bodies stacked there, ready to be burned. And on the way in, there were 40 boxcars loaded with dead people. And why the Germans were living down there, I don't know. But our guys saw these. And one guy was just a little bit alive, and he was able to crawl out before he died. And our fellows saw this, and they were getting very upset. And when they got into camp, they took all the German guards they could find, lined them up along a canal, and gave the weapons to the inmates. And they shot them down, and these 30 or 40 bodies were laying right by that canal when we got there. But the 42nd Division got in at the same time, and there was a lady reporter with them, and she reported this to Patton, that then Colonel Sparks, later became General Sparks, could not keep control of his men. And if anybody could have kept control of those men at that time, and what they just saw, I just don't know how they could. And this guy was something else. Not everybody liked their officers. I met an officer here one time in 45th in Korea. But this guy, when there was an attack, he didn't just say, go get it, boys. He sat in the top of a tank with a shotgun. He never fired a shotgun, but he was right with the infantry guys, and he had tremendous respect. So when the Court-Martial got to Patton, he looked at the thing and saw his record and said, what the hell are you doing here? Get back with your outfit. So thank goodness he was able to do that. And he lived long enough to organize our reunions and so forth, and he became a Supreme Court Justice in the state of Colorado. But after we liberated Dachau, there were 200 people a day dying there of starvation. And then they got out, and they started going down into this town of Munich and so forth. And they weren't doing any physical damage, but they were stealing food and clothing, and nothing about rape or anything else, but they just doing general things that they shouldn't be doing. And then our job was to go and round them up, which they were taking it back to Dachau. They screamed, they didn't want to go back to Dachau. We said, that's where the Red Cross is. They'll have good food, they'll have good clothing, everything else, and they finally conceded to go there. So we ended up in Munich on May the 8th, and that's the day the E-Day was claimed. And the nicest thing we had to do then was we could open our blinds. We didn't have to have on that blackout curtains. Now, the war was over there, but the 45th now was going to go to Japan. They were going to be given a 30-day rest in the States, and they already picked out the island of Kyushu where they were going to land. And they called us all in, and they said, anybody that has 200 or more days of combat, we feel it won't be aggressive enough, so they're going to stay here in army of occupation. Since I had about 300 days of combat, they say you're starting for occupation. So I was sent down to Ingolstadt, and since I had been a phys ed major, they had me in charge of organizing baseball fields, getting the supplies and so forth. And while we were there, the Danube goes by there, and I decided to swim across the Danube. And I can swim pretty well, but it took me an hour to get across because the water is running down out of the Alps so fast, and it's not blue, it's dirty. But I got across the other side. When I was swimming back, I was down another mile down, so I had to walk backwards in my wet clothing for over 2 miles. That was no real hardship. So the final news was that Truman allowed her to drop a bomb. Thank goodness for it, because as most of us know, where it killed 250,000, the Japanese didn't surrender with one bomb. They had to convince them with a second one. And that's the last one we had for a while, but they finally gave in. But the number, we were already firebombing their cities and stuff, Tokyo, and think of the murder, and they didn't know words. The word meaning surrender, so it would have been bloody for both sides. So thank goodness they did that. And when the war was over, I was again sent to Fort Meade, Maryland, where I was discharged on October 3rd, and I got back at the end, last day of October, to my home, and my sister was already enrolled at Penn State. It was going to start on November 1st. So I had been out of the Army for just a few short weeks, and I decided to go back to Penn State, and I did it, and I ended up finishing Penn State after that. And then I went and had a job teaching and coaching at Myerstown for 2 years, and I really enjoyed that. But I think they fired me because with basketball, well, soccer, they had soccer during the war, so we had to clean up all the junk off the field and start soccer. So they only, and then for basketball, we had 3 fellows who ever had on the JV uniform that were still there. So that was my basketball team. And then with baseball, we did a little better because we had a couple of guys that played on the Legion team, Harold Hull and some others, and we won every half our games. And basketball, 2 years in a row, we beat Cornwall the last game of the year. If anybody ever saw that gym at Myerstown, it was an asphalt floor. And somebody said it was quite a gym. But then I ended up getting married and having a young child while we were there. And then I was away from teaching for a while. But then I decided teaching is what I should do. So I got a job in Southwestern Reading, and I was there for 4 years. And then I went to senior high and taught a little bit of everything. Then the department head asked if I teach calculus, and I did. And I had wonderful, wonderful kids. And one of them, I have to watch how I say this, Holly Kofold, a Jewish kid, saying he was bright is almost redundant because every Jewish kid I had was bright. But he ended up going to Penn, graduated cum laude. And he then went to the Wharton School, if anybody ever heard of the Wharton School, a pretty good business school. When he graduated cum laude there, he was made a professor at that school. And then he eventually became the head dean of the Wharton School. He was traveling all over the world talking about economics. And they had a reunion for Reading High graduates about 3 years ago. And while I got there, I saw Howie, and he said, "Mr. Stevenson, I may embarrass you a little bit, but it'll be all right." So when he talked, he said during his time, he always had good teachers from kindergarten, Northeast Junior High, Reading High, graduate and undergraduate school. But the best teacher I ever had was Mr. Stevenson. And I appreciated that, and I told him, I'll tell you why. Many times the guy's laying in his casket, and people say, "I wish I'd have told him this thing." And I said, "You told me now, I'm so, so grateful." And that's my story. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer.
That was great. And as proof of your excellence in teaching, one of your students who's sitting here this evening, look what a great physical specimen he is. Stand up for him. Oh my God, well, there's the other side. That's great, so you can verify what is said on it. If you'll just give me 1 second, I forgot to mention earlier a couple of things. Charlie Lloyd are you here, Charlie? Here he is. He's the guy that lets the newspapers know that we exist and push the word out. And last month, as you may know, a gal was here and a photographer, and they actually put Charlie and me in the paper. I've never seen a worse example of a page one story in my life, but nonetheless, the word's getting out, and that's good. I wish they had said when we meet and how to contact us, but that's coming. I've had some calls and whatnot, so that's good. And lest you think we're the only group, I've become aware lately of a group of guys down in Philadelphia who get together once a month for a little luncheon, World War II luncheon, just veterans. And I've contacted them and asked if a couple of us can come down and interview them and maybe attract them to come up here as well. So things are going on in your little group. And okay, let's see if there's anything. Oh, 2 more things, yes. I'm sure there's somebody in this house that is moderately techie. We are really in need of a website. And some of us have been looking around. There are free sites available that you get on. The only problem is we don't know how to do it. Would anybody like to volunteer? I know it's a bad thing to do, so we won't say volunteer, but would you like to help us out by putting a website together? Anybody? Please? Begging? Young people? No. All right, well, we'll continue to work on that. And finally, our Secretary and Treasurer has, particularly the Treasurer has, as you know, Rich is going on doing so many other things. We need somebody that will step up and help be our Treasurer and get involved a little bit in the running of this stuff. Anybody would like to volunteer to do that? Help us out? They must have all been in the Army. All right, we'll continue the search for that. So, without further ado, anybody got any questions or comments or shared stories that they can share with Frank?
When you joined the Army at the Penn State, they promised you OCS?
That's what they said, either OCS or ASCP.
Okay, but you never got the OCS.
I haven't gotten them yet.
You should have joined the Navy. They promised us OCS, and
Well,
we made it.
As I told some Navy guy here, I hate the Navy. The reason is that when we were going to make the landing in southern France, which was no big deal, we were on a Navy ship, not a British. We had been a British ship before, a Navy ship. We were sleeping out on the decks. They were sleeping in nice bunks. We were eating K-rations every day. And we got off there for the next 72 days. We ate K-rations because we were moving so fast. They were sitting in their mess hall having roast beef and mashed potatoes and gravy and ice cream. I hate the Navy. The other thing is, I also kind of hated the Air Force because if we made 25 patrols, we were allowed to go on the 26th. The Air Force guys, they had 25 safe missions that they could go home. And to me, there were 2 wars at that time. When the war was started in 1943 and early 1944, when they sent the bomber crew out to go over to Germany or France, they were lucky if half of them came back. By 45, I had a couple of buddies who got in the Air Force late, and 45, they were milk runs. The Germans had no more fuel to do anything else. They did get a couple of jets. One of those German jets strafed me one long time. We had no idea what the hell this thing was coming so fast. But it was, well, just different.
Just want to let anybody here that's a reader or wants to follow up on the information. There was a book done at the end of last year by Alex Kershaw. It's called The Liberator, and it's about Colonel Sparks, the regimental commander of the 157. So it's just come out. Looks like it's a good read. So.
Back here, Ed.
I'm sorry, I can't let those comments go unchallenged.
If you had joined the Navy, you would have been
Sleeping in our bunk.
How did you get from the ship to the shore?
Well, that was interesting because all of our practices were on LCIs, which meant you went down that ramp and ran in. When we got into the ship for the landing, no big deal. But they say, when you go down these ropes, hold on to those sides. Don't put your hands up this way or the guy above you will jump. And you get down to the bottom, and that thing's going up and down and up and down. You have to jump about 7 feet and hope you hit the ship. And then the other thing I learned was the Coast Guard guys that manned those things. I always thought the Coast Guard was sitting home in the United States just looking at the ocean. But the Coast Guard guys, when they were making landings, matter of fact, I had a roommate for college, he got in the Coast Guard. He got a direct hit at Normandy. And they didn't have it safe all the time.
That's correct. So you came in on an LCI?
That's how we landed. No, we practiced in LCIs, but we practiced from a regular ship down the rope net.
And other amphibious landings, there's quite a nasty toll, such as at Normandy or whatnot. How was it at Anzio coming in?
Well, actually at Anzio, I went up 7 days later, and it was on a Cannon Company ammo truck. But no deal, we just pulled out the LST, and thank goodness for ships like that. And just up on the beach and on the hill of it, interlands.
Somebody else, way over here. Get ready, this guy's asked questions.
That book you just mentioned, I read a review about it, The Liberator, and did you personally witness the execution of those SS guards
Did I?
at Dachau?
Yes.
You did?
They shot them, yes.
And you say they were inmates.
The inmates had the guns. The guards were standing by the canal. But yes.
Well, what you'll see, you might be interested in that book, because Sparks, they were shot by Americans. They were machine gunned, put up against the wall. The Americans had liberated a camp. They were just disgusted. And that SS unit did attempt to fight. And so they put them up, lined them up, and just started machine gunning them. And there's pictures of Sparks coming in from the side with his .45 drawn, trying to stop this. Oh, but the thing about, the ASTP program, the small print was probably too small for you to read. But if you volunteered or accepted the ASTP program, you waived your right to go to OCS.
Well, now, I have to say something about that. Because they were convinced at the beginning of the war, we were going to win it by bombing. They didn't realize you don't have the ground until you're sitting on it. It takes guys, infantry guys. And all the guys that got ASTP, my brother did, he was going to the Illinois Institute of Technology. And after a while, they realized they needed infantry. Now here's guys that had shortened basic training, air cadets the same way. These guys thought they were going to be second lieutenants as soon as they were commissioned, and right away they're handed a rifle and say, go get them, boy. And they were so desperate for line troops is they go to a guy in prison and say, if you will volunteer to be in the infantry, you will be free and clear of all the things. And I said, what the hell did I do? Did I have to be here with prisoners? It was a way of getting troops.
Yeah, there's a good book on the ASTP program, and it's exactly what you said. That these guys were sitting there, we thought that we needed to mobilize our science and technology branch to beat especially the Germans and the Japanese. But what happens is, especially after the Normandy landings, when Marshall already downsized or downgraded the number of divisions he thought we would need, but the casualty lists were mounting, so who do they turn to get their replacements? They practically ended the ASTP program, and these were, you could say, some of the brightest young men in that generation, and they were put in these units like the 104th, and these ones that get mauled in the Battle of the Bulge. Sorry? In the 106. Yeah, just about all those from the 101st on, you know, not the Screaming Eagles. You weren't in the 101st, were you? Oh, but hey, the comment though about the Navy, do you know what the agreement between the Army and the Navy is? The Navy will deliver U.S. Army troops to any facility, dock, harbor, port, but a fixed facility. If there's none there, they drop us off 3 miles out. And that's why the Army has more boats than the Navy. I said boats.
Unless you say anything bad about the Air Force, they used to give us nice rides. We never get to land with them, though. Out we went. All right, any more questions? Oh, yes.
Just as an aside about Anzio, the reason they didn't take the high ground at Anzio is because the general in charge dilly-dallied around, and by the time they were able to attack, the Germans got some of their troops from down south and brought them up and reinforced it. So if they'd have hit them right away, they took that high ground.
General Truscott.
I don't remember his name, but yeah, he fooled around.
No, it's Lucas. 6 Corps.
Well, Lucas was. Well, Truscott had a 3rd Division, which to me, one guy say, one time some other division came up our flank, and somebody else said, I'd rather have one platoon of the 3rd Division on our flank, because if they say they're going to be there, they'll be there. These other guys, maybe. And that, incidentally, that's the outfit that Audie Murphy was with. And he was one hell of a soldier.
And did you say that you actually knew Barfoot?
What's that?
Did you say you actually knew Sergeant Barfoot?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess he died a year or so ago.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you ever look him up on the internet, there was one hell of a soldier.
Yeah.
And one hell of a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, the Oklahoma National Guard was about 80% Indians.
Anybody else? If not, we really thank you for sharing this with us.
Yeah. How are you, dear? I haven't seen you in a while. Three of them there.
Yeah. Were you in the 157th also?
Absolutely, yeah.
Unfortunately, he had already passed away by the time I moved out here, but I had talked to him for a number of years.
Reunions together for the 45th.
Yeah.
spark.
And everybody, because when we used to do our displays, we'd be the bartenders at night, so that's how I learned.
You don't have a spark, you don't want the thing to start. Just so you know, you stand a chance on sparking.